Imagine Elvis Presley entering an impersonator contest, and not winning. Insane, right? But the shocking truth of that night was even crazier. July 23, 1977. Las Vegas. The ultimate Elvis tribute contest. What if I told you that the real Elvis not only entered his own competition, but won first place, then revealed his identity in a moment that left 3,000 people speechless? This is the most mind-blowing plot twist in entertainment history. It was the summer of 1977. Elvis tribute artists were everywhere. The Elvis phenomenon had reached such heights that impersonator contests were being held in every major city across America. Las Vegas was the epicenter of it all. The International Hotel was hosting its annual contest, and this year was different. The prize money was huge, $50,000 to the winner. Contestants had flown in from around the world. Australia, Japan, Germany. Everyone wanted to be crowned the most authentic Elvis. But what nobody knew was that the real Elvis Presley was dealing with a personal crisis. For months, Elvis had been struggling with his identity. The constant pressure. The expectations. The way people saw him as more of a symbol than a human being. He'd been asking himself a haunting question: have I forgotten how to be Elvis? 3 days before the contest, Elvis was sitting in his penthouse suite at the Hilton, looking down at all the Elvis impersonators practicing in the parking lot below. "Joe," Elvis said to Joe Esposito, his road manager, "look at all those guys down there. They're trying so hard to be me. What if they're better at being Elvis than I am?" Joe thought Elvis was joking. But Elvis was serious. "I've been Elvis Presley for so long, sometimes I wonder if I remember what it felt like when it was natural. When it was real." That's when Elvis made a decision that would become legendary. Can you imagine what was going through his mind? "Joe, I want to enter that contest." "Elvis, you can't be serious." "I am serious. I want to see if I can still be Elvis. Not the Vegas Elvis. Not the movie Elvis. Not the comeback special Elvis. Just Elvis." What happened next was the most elaborate disguise operation in entertainment history. But what nobody knew was that the man about to walk on stage was the king himself. Elvis spent 2 days working with a professional makeup artist. They darkened his skin, changed his hairline, added a fake scar on his cheek, brown contact lenses, a slightly different nose with prosthetics. But the most brilliant part of the disguise was psychological. Elvis decided to perform as early Elvis, the young, hungry performer from the 1950s. He studied his own old footage. Relearned his original mannerisms. His voice. Even the way he walked before fame changed him. He registered under the name Tommy Rivers, from Tupelo, Mississippi. The irony was perfect, he was using his real hometown, but nobody would suspect that. The night of July 23, 1977. The ballroom of the Las Vegas Hilton was packed with 3,000 people. 24 Elvis impersonators from around the world were ready to compete. And in the back, in heavy makeup and a simple black shirt, no jumpsuit, no rhinestones, sat the real Elvis Presley. More nervous than he'd been before any performance in 20 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the host, "welcome to the ultimate Elvis tribute contest." One by one, the contestants performed. Japanese Elvis did a perfect hound dog. British Elvis nailed "Love Me Tender." Australian Elvis, his hip movements so authentic that women in the audience screamed just like they did in the 1950s. Elvis watched from backstage, amazed. These men had studied him so carefully. Had perfected his moves so precisely. That for a moment he wondered if they really were better at being Elvis than he was. Then it was Tommy Rivers's turn. The crowd thought they were seeing just another tribute act, but in reality, history's greatest twist was walking toward the microphone. Elvis walked onto that stage as a nervous impersonator from Tupelo, and something magical happened. For the first time in years, he wasn't performing as Elvis the Legend. He was just a guy who loved music, trying to capture the spirit of a young man who had changed the world. He started with "That's All Right," the first song he'd ever recorded at Sun Studios in 1954. What would you have done if you were in that audience? But instead of the polished Vegas version, Elvis performed it the way he had that very first time. Raw. Uncertain. Full of hope and hunger. His voice cracked slightly on the high notes, just like it had when he was 19. His movements were less controlled. More spontaneous. Not Elvis the Legend. Just Elvis the man. The audience was mesmerized. This impersonator had captured something that all the others had missed: the innocence. The vulnerability. The pure joy that Elvis had before he became Elvis. "This guy is incredible," someone whispered in the audience. "He's not just copying Elvis's moves. He's channeling his soul." When Tommy Rivers finished his performance, the applause was thunderous. But more than that, there was something in the air, a feeling that everyone had just witnessed something extraordinary. The judges deliberated for what felt like hours. When they returned, the host announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, this year's Ultimate Elvis Tribute Contest winner. Tommy Rivers from Tupelo, Mississippi." The crowd erupted. Elvis, still in his disguise, walked forward to accept his trophy. His heart was pounding. He'd done it. He'd proven to himself that he could still be Elvis, the real Elvis. But then, as he stood there holding that trophy, Elvis realized something. This wasn't about proving he could still perform. This was about remembering who he was before the world told him who he should be. But the twist wasn't over yet. Elvis wasn't done. Elvis took the microphone and looked out at the 3,000 people who had just crowned him the best Elvis impersonator in the world. "Thank you," he said, and even disguised, something about his voice made people lean forward. "Thank you so much for this honor. But I have something I need to tell you." He paused. The entire ballroom went silent. "My name isn't Tommy Rivers." 1 second, silence. 3,000 people holding their breath. The next second, history was made. Elvis reached up and slowly began removing his makeup. The scar, gone. The brown contacts, removed. And then, those famous blue eyes. He ran his hand through his hair, restoring it to that familiar style. Imagine being there. 1 second, you think you're watching just another tribute artist. The next second, you realize you're staring at the real Elvis Presley. "My name is Elvis Presley. And you just voted the real Elvis, the best Elvis impersonator." For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 3,000 people stared at the stage in complete shock. Then someone in the back screamed. Then another person. Then the entire ballroom exploded in a way that had never been heard before. People weren't just cheering for Elvis the superstar. They were cheering for the most incredible reveal in entertainment history. They were cheering for a man who had just played the most elaborate practical joke ever conceived. But more than that, they were witnessing something beautiful, Elvis Presley remembering how to be himself. If this reveal blows your mind, hit that like button right now. "You know," Elvis said into the microphone, his real voice now filling the room, "I entered this contest because I wanted to see if I could still be Elvis. What I learned tonight is that I never stopped being Elvis. I just forgot that Elvis was never about the jumpsuits. Or the Vegas shows. Or the movie contracts." He looked out at the audience, many of whom were crying. Elvis was always just about a kid from Tupelo who loved music and wanted to make people happy. And tonight, performing for you as Tommy Rivers, I remembered what that felt like. Nobody in that audience could believe what they were witnessing. What happened next became the stuff of legend. "Since I'm already up here," Elvis said with that famous grin, "and since you all came to see Elvis, how about I give you a real show? For the next 2 hours, Elvis performed what many consider to be one of his greatest concerts ever. But it wasn't the usual Vegas spectacular. This was intimate. Raw. Authentic Elvis, the Elvis he'd rediscovered by pretending to be someone else pretending to be him. He sang songs he hadn't performed in years. He told stories about his childhood in Tupelo. He talked about his mother. About his early days at Sun Records. About the fear and excitement of those first performances. You know, Elvis said during the show, people always ask me what it's like to be Elvis Presley. Tonight, I remembered, it's like being the luckiest guy in the world, because I get to share music with people like you. When the concert ended, Elvis did something unprecedented. He invited all 24 impersonators back on stage. These gentlemen, Elvis said, they've studied me so carefully. They've honored me so completely. That they've taught me things about myself I'd forgotten. They deserve to share this stage. Do you think anyone in that room will ever forget that night? The story of Elvis's impersonator contest spread like wildfire. But in 1977, there was no social media. No internet. No way for the story to go viral instantly. It spread through word of mouth. Through newspaper articles. Through the people who were lucky enough to be there. But here's the incredible part, Elvis made everyone in that audience promise to keep the story quiet for 1 month. He wanted to do more contests. Wanted to continue rediscovering himself through the eyes of his impersonators. Tragically, Elvis died just 3 weeks later, on August 16, 1977. The impersonator contest performance became one of his final acts, and in many ways, one of his most meaningful. The other contestants from that night never forgot the experience. Japanese Elvis, whose real name was Hiroshi Tanaka, said years later, that night, Elvis taught us that the best way to honor someone isn't to copy them perfectly. It's to understand the spirit behind what they do. British Elvis, David Matthews, became a lifelong advocate for authenticity in performance. Elvis showed us that even Elvis had to work to remember how to be Elvis. That gave me permission to stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be real. But perhaps the most important impact was on Elvis himself. According to those closest to him, that night at the contest changed something in Elvis. In his final weeks, friends said he seemed more at peace. More connected to the music and the joy that had driven him in the beginning. After that night, said Charlie Hodge, Elvis's longtime friend, Elvis was different. He remembered why he fell in love with performing in the first place. He stopped trying to live up to the legend and started just being the man who loved music. The story of Elvis entering his own impersonator contest reminds us that sometimes the best way to find yourself is to pretend to be someone else, even if that someone else is you. It also shows us that authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about remembering what made you real in the first place. Elvis spent so many years being Elvis Presley that he'd forgotten how to be Elvis. It took disguising himself as Tommy Rivers to rediscover the young man from Tupelo who just wanted to make people happy with music. Today, Elvis impersonator contests continue around the world. And many of them include a moment of silence for both Elvis Presley and Tommy Rivers, the man who reminded us all that the best performances come not from imitation, but from truth. This wasn't just the night Elvis fooled 3,000 people. Pause. It was the night Elvis found himself. Pause. And in doing so, he gave everyone in that audience, and everyone who hears this story, permission to stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be real. If Elvis had to rediscover who Elvis was, what does that tell us about our own journey to authenticity? If Elvis had to rediscover himself, maybe we all do. Subscribe for more true stories that prove reality beats fiction. Share this mind-blowing story with someone who needs to remember that it's okay to sometimes lose yourself in order to find yourself. Comment below, have you ever had to disguise yourself to discover who you really were? If the king of rock and roll had to remember how to be himself, maybe we all deserve the same grace on our own journey to authenticity. Puanla.